So I'm supposed to make a close crop image and bring it into InDesign and do a text wrap around it. So how do I go about doing that? Let me show you. I'm sharing my screen. We're going to go to the internet. Let's go to the internet first of all, because what we have to do is go get an image. So I'm looking for rutabagas. Hey, there's a really nice looking rutabaga right there. So I'm going to grab this image. I can just control click on it right there, and it says save this image as rutabaga. And I can put it, well, wherever I want to, I guess. I can put it in Creative Technologies 1, inside Project 3, InDesign, and say good. So now I've got that downloaded. See there, it comes up rutabaga.jpg, and I can click there, and it says, well, you've told me that JPEGs are Photoshop files. So I'm going to go open that in Photoshop. Super, that's what I want. So now what I want to do is select this. It's a great picture. I love that rutabaga. However, it's got a bunch of other junk in it. I wanted just the rutabaga and not all the other stuff that's in the background. So we're looking at selection. Selection is really the game in Photoshop. If you can figure out how to do good selections in Photoshop, you've got the game won. So I've got a few options here. I've got a magic wand tool that I can use that will pick anything within 20 numbers of the pixel that I click on. As you know, there are 256 colors in that range. So if I click on this pixel, it'll pick anything within 20 of that pixel that I just clicked on. If I click on this one, it'll pick within 20 of that. So it'll choose a few things for me, but it's not really that helpful when it comes to this. If I had no background, I could use the magic wand tool to select that because it's all the same. Right now, my background is too varied, it's too different to do that. But I've got a couple of other options over here. I've got Object Selection Tool, which says, do you want to use the lasso or do you want to use a rectangle to try and figure out, let Photoshop figure out what it is that you're trying to select. So I'm going to use the lasso tool and just kind of go, grab, this thing. I'm just going to roughly rip around that and say, you figure it out. And Photoshop goes, well, it seems to me that you probably want this thing. Look at that. Like, how great is that? It's it's figured out. This is a rutabaga. This is not. Even with all the variety that's happening inside that, it knows enough not to get that. But it will let me add that if I want to. So it's given me a lot of control over exactly what I want. Super. I could also have used object selection, or the quick selection tool, deselect, and gone back in here and said, I want this, and just kind of, paint over this shape until I get what I want. So I could do it that way as well. So here we are doing selections in Photoshop. Another, of course, great way to do selections is to use the pen tool and draw a path around that, and then use that to make a selection. So that's another way to do it. There's my pen tool there. So now I've got a selection made. I want to get rid of the background because I want to just keep the rutabaga by itself. But what I've got over here, you'll notice, is I've got this layer isn't actually a layer. It basically says, I've got a file here with no layers to it. So we have to create a layered file first of all. So if I just double click on the word background there, it says, you want to call that layer 0 instead? I do. And now I've got a layer that I can play with. So the selection right now is the rutabaga and not anything else. What I want to do is throw away the background. So I want to inverse my selection to get everything but the rutabaga and throw that away. So select inverse, and then hit the delete key, and poof, gone. Great, right? And then I can deselect. So now I've got a layer with a rutabaga on it and no background. But you probably say to yourself, it looks a little weird. It looks a little kind of like it's floating in space. So if you have a drop shadow underneath that makes it look like it's sitting on something, that would be more plausible. Give me a new layer. I'm going to put that layer, sure, right there underneath my rutabaga. And then what I'm going to do is just draw a shape of a shadow, a cast shadow, about like that, the way that the shadow would fall under a rutabaga. And then what I want to do is feather that selection. Control click to feather that, or I can come up here to say select, modify, feather. And what we're doing is making that edge blurry. So we're giving it, say, 30 pixels. Sure, why not? And then what I'm going to do is fill that shape, that resulting blurry shape, with, I'll say 50% gray, or I could pick a color, or I could pick black. Okay. And maybe I don't like how dark that is, and maybe I'd like it to be a little bit darker. I can actually go Command L, which gets me into my levels, and lighten or darken that shadow until I'm kind of happy with how that looks. Okay. Okay. So now what I've got, deselect again, is my rutabaga sitting on a shadow, and I can control exactly where that lands. If I grab the shadow by itself, I can move it until I'm kind of happy with how it's sitting on that. So now it looks like I've got a rutabaga with a shadow underneath it. I kind of like to keep my transparent background, right? So I can go here and say, export this, save this, quick export as a PNG file. PNGs, as you know, allow for transparent backgrounds. So I can keep a certain level of transparency in this file and have that show up when I go back to my InDesign. Rutabaga.png, project 3 InDesign, save me. I like it. What's really cool about saving a PNG is that that transparency will maintain itself even when we go back into something like InDesign. So if I go back to InDesign and say I've got a new document and it looks like that, and I've got a big sidebar panel over here that goes across my bleed, and then I want to bring in my rutabaga, I'm going to just fill that with a color, cyan, beautiful. Then I go back here and say I want to bring in a photograph. There's my rectangle frame tool right there. I'm going to draw that, watch this, I'm going to draw that right across there, and then Command D or place under the file menu and say, come on, where's my rutabaga? Project 3 InDesign, rutabaga.png. There it is right there. And I plop that puppy in there, and look how great that is. My shadow is translucent over here. It crosses over that barrier. It fits right inside that shape. I can get that if I wanted to. Shift Command C will center it. Shift Command E will make it fit the whole box as best it can. I kind of like how that's looking right there. And then if I just type W, I get a look at that page as it's supposed to be. So now I'm happy with that. If I wanted to put a little bit of type on this thing, I could put some type right here. I'm going to drag a little text box there, say type, fill with placeholder text, and then grab this guy and say, I want that to be a text wrap. I don't want it to be like that. I want it to be like that. I don't want it to be like that. I want it to be like that. None of those are working. So I'm going to go into my window, text wrap menu. Say I do want it to be like that, but I want it to be, don't use both right and left sides. I want to use left side only. And I want it to be wrap on. I'm going to change the way that this is working. Slide away from spine. Right side. Nope. So I'm not getting my options down in here. That's what I want. Still not getting it. In case you're fighting with yours, know that I am also fighting with mine. I do want it to be on the left side, yeah, but I should be getting a chance here to say, give me that text wrap there. There we go. So I was on, I had the wrong box selected. So I don't want same as clipping. I'm going to say detect edges. And it kind of looks at that and says, I'm going to try and wrap it around that. Alpha channel, select subject. There we go. That's more like it. I might go select subject or same as clipping. You can see you got a lot of choices in here in terms of what works and what doesn't. So you can choose something that will work for you. And then you can also say, I want that to be a little bit bigger around the outside. I want to just give it a little more space around the outside. So now I got a text wrap around my rutabaga with my drop shadow with that transparent PNG file that I brought in. So I'm pretty happy with the way that whole thing went, except for all that fighting I had to do to try and figure out how to get that to wrap around there. But hey, if I'm fighting with it, maybe you'll sign it yourself. Look, I'm not the only one. Hopefully that is clear and makes sense and you found yourself going, cool. See ya.